We're going to take the wheels off of this Rift. The Rift does a really great job hiding all of the wires and cables to the brakes, the motor, the controller, all within the frame, so it looks really nice. But when it comes to maintenance, like taking the rear wheel off to replace a tire, it makes it a little more difficult. The disconnect for the large wire to the motor is inside the frame. So we've got to do a little extra work to get the rear tire off, rear wheel off, but it's nothing you can't handle. I'm going to show you how to do it right now. Before we get started, these are the tools you're going to need. A 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, a couple of zip ties, one large, one medium, a 15 millimeter wrench, an 18 millimeter wrench, and some snips to cut the zip ties that are on there off. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the battery. It's going to make it a little bit lighter, easier to manage. We'll take that out, set that aside. Next, you're going to want to remove any accessories you've added to the handlebars because we are going to be flipping this bike upside down. We don't want to damage any accessories. This is my wife's bike. She's put a rear mirror, a cup holder. We're also going to have to remove the display as well. We don't want to scratch or break the display when we flip the bike upside down. Again, real simple. I'll show you how it's done. Power goes to your display by a waterproof plug, and your display is held onto your handlebars by a socket cap screw. We're going to start by removing the plug. All you have to do is pull to pop that off. I like to start with that while the display is still secure. It makes it a little easier to pop that plug off. Next, we're going to use a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, and we're going to loosen up this socket cap screw. Display comes right off. We're going to set that aside. Now that your handlebars are bare, we're going to raise this seat up a bit, almost to the handlebar height, to use it to help balance our bike, because we're going to flip this upside down. It's an 85-pound bike, so it seems daunting to flip it upside down. Easiest way to do this is by grabbing the rear brake and just pulling back on the handlebars. And it's going to flip right over, real easy. A lot simpler than you'd think it would be. We're going to grab a hold of the forks to help lower it down. And we've got our bike upside down, real easy. Now our controller is housed inside the frame. Like I said, this makes it look real nice, real clean. It does make it a little more difficult when it comes to maintenance. So we're going to take what should be these 3 screws off. Ours is missing one. I don't know if it rattled loose or if it was never there. It's a good reminder to always check your hardware. Make sure everything's tight at all times. We're going to use the same 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench to take off these screws. And this cover is going to come right off. And behind it is your controller. Next thing we're going to do is pull the controller out, and we're going to release this cable that's connected to your motor. Pull those two apart because we're going to need this loose. The cable for your motor runs all the way through the frame. It has a zip tie around it to keep the cable from hitting your disc brake. We're just going to snip that guy off. We'll replace it at the end. The next thing we're going to do is use our 18 millimeter wrench to remove this acorn nut. You'll have a nut and 3 washers. One of these washers is a spacer to get into this gap on your dropout. We're going to do that on both sides. Now it's time to pull the wheel out. The derailleur is going to get in your way a little bit, but it will pull back and move out of your way. You're going to pull a sprocket out of the chain, and again, as we pull out this cable that goes all the way to the front where the controller is, we're going to pull that cable out, and there's going to be another disconnect that we're going to have to disconnect. So let's give this a pull. Pull your derailleur out of the way. Get it off the chain. And we're we're going to give it a little bit of tension to get this wire moving. And I lied. This one does not have a disconnect. This one goes all the way through the frame. So we're going to have to feed that back through the frame when we're done. No issue. And just like that, we've got our rear wheel off. Like I said, a little more challenging than typical, but it's nothing you can't handle. It comes right off. We've got a little bit of chaos. It looks like we blew the thing up, but we'll get it all back together and clean it up when we're done. Next, we're going to take this front wheel off, and it's as simple as can be. Once you get the rear wheel off, the front wheel is real easy. It is going to take a 15mm wrench. Again, we have acorn nuts and a washer on each side. We're going to remove the acorn nut and washer. Do that on both sides. And then we'll simply just pull that one up and off. While you have your tires off, this is going to be the best view you have of your brake pads. I always recommend checking your pad life while you have your wheels and tires off. This one has plenty of meat on it, no issues. Don't need to replace the pads today. All right, so now that we've changed our tires, it's time to put the wheels back on the bike. We're going to start with the front wheel because it makes us feel like we've accomplished something, and it's super easy. So all we have to do, drop this down into your forks. Make sure that disc goes right between your brake pads. You did this when you assembled the bike, real simple. We're going to take our two washers, put our washers on first, and then our acorn nuts. Again, these front nuts are a 15. Just get them nice and snug. Let's move on to the back. We've got this derailleur in our way. We're going to have to pull it up and move it out of the way. We're going to get our chain on here as we're doing it. And then, of course, we've got our power cable that's got to go through the frame back to connect to the controller. So, also your axle here is flat on two sides. That's going to slip right into here. You're going to have to position it so it slips in. We can spin it a little bit to get it to fit, but this is going to take a little bit of maneuvering and a little bit of holding, and you're going to wish you had four hands. If you've got someone to help you, it makes it way easier, but it's perfectly easy enough to do by yourself. We're going to start by putting our cable up through the frame. We need to get that started before we can get the tire or the wheel back on. So I like to straighten this out as much as I can to help me get around these corners. It is a pretty stiff cable. I like to rest my tire on the fender, and then we're just going to slide it in nice and gently and hope we don't run into any snags. It does feel like it's going to go through easy. You can see it popping out here. There is a hole here that we're going to push the cable through. All right, now that we're in that hole, we can move back to the tire because we've got this position the way we need it to be. Now we're going to flip over to the other side, hit the chain, lift the derailleur, perfect. That was easy. That was the hard part, and it's done. So now we're going to put our washers and our acorn nuts back on. As I mentioned, this spacer has a little extra that needs to go right in between this cutout. Real easy. Then your smaller washer, large washer, acorn nut. And again, we're going to use an 18. Tighten that down. We're going to do the same thing on both sides. So now we've got our cable here. We need to connect these two cables together. If you can see, there's an arrow on this one, and there's an arrow on this one. That's going to help you line up your pins. Stick that together, and we're going to tighten this up to keep it from coming apart. I mentioned you want a large zip tie On my bike, this is all zip tied together onto the controller. It appears they didn't have this one zip tied together, so it must not be necessary. I'm going to go ahead and put it back the same way it came apart and forget the zip tie. All we have to do is, see if we can get this out of the way so you can see what we're doing. Stick all the wires and the controller back in. Put our cover back on. Now what you're going to want to do is give this a nice turn with the pedals. That's going to allow the chain to drop into the whatever gear you had it in previously, and make sure you don't have any crazy wobbles going on. After we've got everything buttoned back up, again, we do have this cable running back here behind the frame, and it comes real close to the brake disc. So we're going to stick a zip tie up through here. You can see the line where the old zip tie was. Bike's gotten a little dirty. And we're just going to add our zip tie there to hold that cable away from the disc. Then we'll snip it clean. All right, let's flip it back over. I'm going to go the same way we did when we flipped it upside down. I'm going to use the forks and the tire to get me started. Grab a hold of that rear brake so it doesn't slip out from underneath you. Now you can let go of the rear brake. Rear brake again. Set it down nice and gently. It's easy, no problems. Now we've got to put our display back on. Right, and just like the motor cable, you have a little arrow here pointing to the top. Might take a little wiggle to get in, and you're good.